is Teotihuacan, one of the great cities of ancient America. What happened here, many hundreds of years before the coming of Europeans, sealed the fate of an entire people. Teotihuacan was revered throughout ancient America as the birthplace of the gods, the sacred place where an act of sacrifice began the world. It was here, it was believed, in this huge structure known as the Pyramid of the Sun, that the gods created the current world. According to an ancient legend, a god sacrificed himself here and was reborn as the fifth sun, who gave light and life to the current world. Teotihuacan was also the birthplace of a special kind of war, a war initiated for the sole purpose of capturing warriors for human sacrifice. Even more astonishing, the Teotihuacanos went to war based on the movements of the planet Venus. Venus, the morning star, was associated with the god Quetzalcoatl, also known as the feathered serpent. This temple was the center of the cult of Quetzalcoatl. Astronomers here had tracked the complex movements of Venus. Certain alignments, they believed, called for the initiation of a Venus cult war. The goal of this type of war was to capture opposing warriors for ritual sacrifice. And this wasn't just bloodlust. These Indians believed that warrior sacrifice was necessary for nothing less than the continued existence of their world. Blood was a requirement, demanded by the gods of the heavens. Without a renewal ceremony with a blood offering, the world would end. For reasons not fully understood, this Venus war cult enabled Teotihuacan to dominate Mexico and Central America. The city prospered as tribute flowed in from all parts of the empire. Teotihuacan came to a catastrophic end around AD 750. The city was torched by unknown invaders. One of the world's greatest cities simply ceased to be. But the cult of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, lived on. The belief in this god would have a profound effect in the coming centuries, effectively dooming all of the great civilizations of ancient America. Today, the ruins of ancient America remind us of a glorious past. Temple cities that rise above the rainforests and fields of Mexico and Central America. Monuments to thriving pre-European civilizations located in harsh, seemingly uninhabitable environments. Large cities mysteriously abandoned and left to the ravages of time. To explore these sites is to walk in the footsteps of an American Indian people who thrived while Europe was in the Dark Ages. The Native Americans who lived here were a highly cultured people who achieved great things in art and science. These cities were bustling centers of trade and learning, cosmopolitan urban environments as populous as any on Earth. But these cities were first and foremost religious centers. They existed as sacred sites, places where the gods spoke to men during intense hallucinogenic rituals. Visiting these sites is also to walk in the footsteps of explorers, adventurers, and conquistadors. These lands were brutally conquered by the Spanish. Hernán Cortés, leader of the army that conquered the Aztec Empire, purposely destroyed Indian temples and artworks in his relentless campaign to convert the Indians to Christianity. Centuries later, the explorer, John L. Stevens, published accounts of his travels to these abandoned and forgotten Maya Indian sites, renewing interest in these mysterious lost cities of ancient America. This program will journey to all of the major ruins in Mexico and Central America, remarkable places that we are only now beginning to understand. The end of the ancient American way of life started here, on this Gulf Coast beach known as Villarrica. Hernán Cortés landed here in 1519. With only 600 soldiers, he was hardly equipped to conquer the vast Aztec Empire. But with the help of his slave and mistress, the Indian princess Malintzin, Cortés was able to enlist Indian allies in the cause against the despised Aztec rulers. After sending one ship back to Spain, Cortés burned his fleet. Now there was no turning back as the soldiers headed toward the distant mountains to the west. Their journey was going to end in triumph or death. The quest for the treasures of the Aztecs led Cortés and his Indian allies through the city of Cholula, site of the largest pyramid in Mexico. Malintzin convinced Cortés that the Cholulans were plotting against the Spanish. Cortés retaliated by massacring 3,000 of the unsuspecting citizens of this city. The Spanish vowed to replace every Indian temple with a church. Today, the only intact pyramid left in Cholula is this replica that sits in a playground. After Cholula, the Spanish lust for the reputed gold of the Aztec capital was at a fever pitch. Cortés and his Indian allies planned their route into the legendary city of Tenochtitlan. This mountain pass is still known as Cortés Pass. It is here that the Spanish army, now swelled with hundreds of Indian allies, began their descent into the Valley of Mexico. These conquistadors could not have been prepared for what they would find beyond this forest. The Spanish were dumbfounded upon first seeing the Aztec capital. It was beyond all expectation. Here, on a shimmering lake in the distance below, was a city beyond imagination, an hallucinatory vision that defied the senses. On first seeing this unexpected city, the Spanish soldier, Bernal Diaz, wrote,
I thought that no land like it would ever be discovered in the New World. We were astonished because of the great stone towers and temples and buildings that rose out of the water. Some of our soldiers said that all these things seemed to be a dream, and it is no wonder that I write here in this manner, for never was there seen, nor heard, nor ever dreamt anything like that which we then observed.
Such was the power of the Aztec capital that it caused the Spanish to question their sense of reality. Tenochtitlan was the center of a great empire, a magnificent city beyond the comprehension of the alien invaders from Europe. Today, the center of Tenochtitlan is buried underneath this cathedral. This plaza, known as the Zocalo, is still the political center of Mexico. Here, European-style monuments celebrate the founding of Tenochtitlan and the establishment of the Aztec Empire. The Aztecs were relative latecomers to the Valley of Mexico. According to Aztec mythology, Tenochtitlan was built on the sacred spot marked by an eagle with a snake in its beak. In truth, this site was the only place available to the wandering nomads who were considered barbarians by their neighbors. But the Aztecs were great warriors. They cleverly built a power base by acting as mercenaries for the various powers in the valley. They exacted tribute from most of Mexico and Central America. Much of their art survives. This is the famous Aztec sunstone, located in the National Museum of Anthropology. It is often mistakenly referred to as a calendar. It is actually an apocalyptic monument that depicts the world ending as the sun crashes into the earth. This Aztec belief in a catastrophic end, a coming apocalypse, was to mesmerize and confound the Aztecs in their dealings with Cortés. Moctezuma II, the Aztec ruler, had known for some time about the Spanish. He was unsettled by the strange omens and predictions of doom that marked the years before Cortés' arrival. Mysterious singing voices were heard in the night. Lightning struck the city in perfect weather. A great comet pierced the night sky. The Aztec prophets had an explanation. These were signs that Quetzalcoatl's return was near. Imbued with the fatalism of his religion, Moctezuma believed that Cortés could indeed be the human manifestation of Quetzalcoatl. Determined not to offend a man who might be a god, Moctezuma welcomed Cortés into Tenochtitlan. After a spoken homage in the poetic language of the Aztec court, Moctezuma gave Cortés the throne of Mexico. Cortés and his men were stunned. Unbelievably, they were given the Aztec Empire without a fight. But these divine beings from the Eastern Sea soon revealed their intentions. The Aztecs were shocked by the Spanish lust for gold. In the words of an Indian, they snatched it up like monkeys. They were swollen with greed. Moctezuma and his advisors slowly began to question the divinity of these men. Their avarice and lack of respect for the Aztec religion were certainly ungodlike characteristics. These dancers in the Zocalo are performing within a few feet of where a similar dance in 1519 triggered a revolt that literally doomed the Aztec Empire. It all began when Cortés, upon hearing of the arrival of a Spanish force on the coast, hurriedly left the capital. He put the demented Pedro de Alvarado in charge. At this same time, the Aztecs received Spanish permission to stage a ceremonial dance in the city's center. The intense vigor of the dancing and the odd music were too much for Alvarado. He ordered his men to butcher the defenseless dancers. A remarkable slaughter followed. Soon, all of Tenochtitlan was in revolt. Cortés returned to find his troops surrounded by a massive Aztec army. Moctezuma was killed in this siege. Cortés narrowly escaped by leading his troops across a causeway and out of the city. But the Aztecs still had one more chance to finish off the depleted Spanish force. The two armies met at the small town of Otumba. Their leaders, wearing elaborate war costumes, were killed in a desperate charge by the Spanish. Once their standard was captured, the Aztecs fell into confusion and retreated. It was a stunning and demoralizing defeat. This monument in Mexico City commemorates the last Aztec emperor, Cuauhtémoc. He is depicted as the heroic protector of his people. Cuauhtémoc, above all else, was a realist. He had no delusions about the divinity of Cortés. He knew he was fighting a ruthless man bent on conquest. Cortés and his Indian allies returned to finish off Tenochtitlan in 1521. Attacking on land and water, he managed to subdue the city after a 3-month siege. This monument, located on a downtown street in Mexico City, relates the story of the surrender of Tenochtitlan. The defeated Cuauhtémoc is shown reaching for Cortés' knife, asking to be killed. Cortés, out of respect for Cuauhtémoc's bravery, refuses the request. But Cuauhtémoc was sent to the gallows in 3 years' time, much to the delight of a vengeful Malintzin. The Aztec defeat was all but inevitable. The city had been ravaged by smallpox, one of the biological weapons the Spanish unwittingly brought to the New World. Weakened with disease, the Aztecs could no longer defend themselves. The Spaniards' first act of victory was to destroy the Aztecs' temples and build this cathedral in their place. The great artworks and books of the Aztecs were burned or buried. Priests were brought in to civilize and Christianize the natives, systematically destroying their culture. Of the 200,000 people who were living in the city of Tenochtitlan at the time Cortés received his royal reception from Moctezuma, fewer than 70,000 survived the extended Spanish siege. Once firmly established in central Mexico, the Spanish easily subjugated the old Aztec Empire. The Indians who had been Spanish allies were paid for their loyalty with slavery and disease. The final apocalypse as predicted by the Aztec prophets, had come to pass. The Aztecs thought Cortez was the god Quetzalcoatl, a mistake which cost an empire. The roots of this ancient American fatalism, this obsession with the end of time, began many years earlier along the Gulf Coast, south of present-day Veracruz. This is the land of the mysterious rubber people, known today as the Olmecs. Here in the lush vegetation of one of the planet's wettest environments, the Olmecs created the first great civilization of ancient America. The Olmecs built the first large ceremonial pyramids in these lands. This is the site of Tres Zapotes, once an Olmec religious center. Sites like Tres Zapotes were elaborately defined sacred zones. Within their confines, the normal rules of time and space could, during rituals, be altered. These rituals were led by special men, kings who were more than mere leaders. They were intermediaries between the gods and mankind. The timing and nature of these sacred rituals were determined by another Olmec invention, the sacred calendar. This calendar was more than a way to mark time. It was nothing less than the cosmic force that controlled all life in the universe. The Olmec civilization came to a violent end. Their ceremonial centers were destroyed in a frenzy of violence that included deliberate destruction of their statues and monuments. But the Olmec idea of building a sacred city with a godlike ruler spread to what is now the state of Oaxaca on Mexico's west coast. Today, this city is called Monte Alban, ancient capital of the Zapotecs. These plazas, during calendar-related rituals, would become sacred space, a portal to the next world. Here, the dead could speak to the living. This concept of sacred space is still believed by the people who live near these ruins. For these Mexicans, this cemetery has become a place where the normal rules of life and death do not apply. Here, during the holiday known as Day of the Dead, the deceased come alive by entering the bodies of the living. This is a profound spiritual experience for these Mexicans, a way to feel the presence of a departed family member. In this cemetery, time and space are altered as spirits from the past enter the world of the living. This is an echo of the vision-inducing rituals held at all the great pyramid cities, ceremonies in which Indian priests would call forth the spirits of the ancestors. The ruins of El Tajín, a huge Gulf Coast city, are near the location Cortez chose for his landing in 1519. El Tajín was abandoned by the time of Cortez's arrival, another in a long list of ancient American cities that had come to an unexplained end. The calendar invented by the Olmecs is still very much in evidence here at El Tajín. These voladores are performing a dangerous ritual directly related to the ancient American sacred calendar. The men are said to represent macaws, symbols of the sun. Each of the 4 men makes 13 revolutions, 4 times 13 being 52, the number of years in an Indian century. These performers are reenacting the cycles of the sacred calendar. Unlike contemporary written calendars, the sacred calendar was an abstract mathematical concept based on observations of the movements of heavenly bodies. This calendar can be pictured as 3 concentric interlocking rings. The outer ring is the solar year. The middle ring is the 260-day year. The inner ring is the 13-day week. The 3 interacting cycles would repeat the same combination once every 52 years, a pivotal day that called for spectacular renewal rituals. The architecture here at El Tahin reflects this knowledge. This is the pyramid of the niches. There are 365 niches, one for each day of the solar year. These ancient cities were aligned with celestial events. Temples face the rising and setting sun. Sightlines indicate the fall and spring equinoxes. These alignments determined when fields were planted and harvested, when great public rituals began, and when it was the time to make war. Here at Teotihuacan, the time to make war was tied to the movements of the planet Venus, a refinement of the sacred calendar. This belief was to take a strange twist at the nearby city of Tula, where the god Quetzalcoatl became a man. The Toltecs adopted the Teotihuacano practice of ritual warrior sacrifice. The main temple here is dominated by fearsome warrior images. Gruesome images depicting wolves and eagles devouring human hearts are evidence that human sacrifice was part of the ritual life of this city. But Tula is most famous as being the place where Quetzalcoatl took on human form. One Toltec ruler, it is traditionally believed, took the name of the god Quetzalcoatl. The man Quetzalcoatl was soon driven from Tula by rivals. This was the beginning of the prophecy that Quetzalcoatl would one day return from the east to reclaim his throne. Tula fell into ruin in the middle of the 12th century AD. Like virtually all the previous city-states of ancient America, Tula came to a catastrophic and unexplained end. But the belief that the feathered serpent would one day return from the eastern sea was to play into the hands of Cortés, who had the remarkable good fortune to arrive on the Mexican coast in the year Reed 1 on the Aztec calendar, the precise time of Quetzalcoatl's predicted return. The arrival of Cortés meant an end to the great pyramid cities of central Mexico. The Indian peoples of ancient America believed that history flowed in cycles and that all civilizations come to an end. Cortés and his band of adventurers were just the men to fulfill this expectation. The Maya Indians were in a serious decline when the first Europeans arrived. Hundreds of Maya temple cities from the Yucatan to the Guatemalan highlands were abandoned by the time the Spanish marched into these lands. But the Maya had no intention of succumbing easily to the arrogant Europeans. Many preferred suicide to slavery. A group of Maya here in Chiapas jumped from these cliffs rather than surrender to the Spanish. But the Spanish eventually conquered the Maya lands. They destroyed the Indian idols, burnt their books, and dismantled many of their temples. The Maya past was officially erased from history. During the period after the Spanish conquest, the memory of the great Maya ceremonial cities faded. Many Maya retreated deep into the rainforest where their descendants still live. Others adopted the European religion while still secretly practicing the ancient ways. It is into this environment that John L. Stevens, a New York lawyer, entered the Maya lands. John L. Stevens was fascinated with the tales he heard about undiscovered cities. This part of Mexico and Central America was largely unknown territory on the maps of 1839. A few explorers had written vague accounts of strange ruins unlike any in the Old World. Stevens and Frederick Catherwood, an illustrator, set off for Honduras and the rumored city of Copan. What they found there was to astonish the world. They could hardly believe their luck when they finally arrived. Here were magnificent ruins, sculpted images, and buildings beyond all expectation.
The beauty of the sculpture, the mystery that hung over it all created an interest higher, if possible, than I had ever felt among the ruins of the Old World.
While Stevens wrote and surveyed, Catherwood sketched. He used a camera lucida, a device that projected an image onto paper so that his renderings would be as accurate as possible in every detail. Stevens was stunned by the fact that the city had obviously been abandoned for centuries. He believed some famine, war, or pestilence may have piled the streets with the dead. This fact continues to baffle scientists who have no agreed-upon explanation for the abandonment of any of the classic Maya sites. Stevens speculated that Copan was a holy city, the Mecca or Jerusalem of an unknown people. He was more accurate than he knew. Copan was the site of intense religious rituals, including the sacred ball game, played here on this court. As the king of Copan watched, players would bounce a large rubber ball off the sides of these walls, hoping to score a goal. This was a game for life itself. The players were reenacting an ancient myth of survival, a story about hero twins who outsmarted the gods of death. The losing players, those not clever enough to outwit death, were sacrificed on this stone. Stevens left Copan with the intention of finding the legendary city of Palenque, 300 miles to the west as the crow flies. This meant traveling through Guatemala, a mountainous country in the midst of a civil war. This part of Guatemala is a geologically unstable land of endless volcanic mountains. Stevens, staying in the colonial capital of Antigua, described the city as
a more natural beauty than any location I ever saw, and has perhaps undergone more calamities than any city.
Today, the city remains a monument to the power of the earthquake that devastated this city in 1773. Destroyed churches and decapitated statues are reminders of the hundreds who were crushed to death in that fateful year. Stevens took a detour down the Pacific coast and back through Guatemala City. He witnessed terrible battles and massacres, all part of an ongoing civil war. But the journey through Guatemala was not without its highlights. Stevens was stunned by Lake Atitlan, which in his typically enthusiastic style he described as the most magnificent spectacle we ever saw. Stevens and his group left Atitlan for the long, arduous journey through the highlands of Guatemala. Stevens was told of a magnificent lost city in the jungle north of the mountains. Stevens was grieved by the information, knowing he could not make the trip because these ruins were in wild country in an unsettled state. Stevens was probably talking about Tikal, one of the great architectural achievements of the Maya. Stevens was told of the site by a padre who had
wandered through its silent streets and over its gigantic buildings. The place was described as almost as perfect as when it was evacuated by its inhabitants.
Tikal still fits the old padre's description. It does appear to be a city abandoned in almost perfect condition. Today, only the eerie shrieks of howler monkeys break the morning quiet among the ruins, where between the 6th and 8th centuries AD, tens of thousands worked and lived in the 75 square miles that made up this great city. The hieroglyphics on these stone monuments relate the history of Tikal's kings, including their conquests of neighboring cities. Scientists now believe these rulers engaged in the same Venus cult war practiced at Teotihuacan. When the position of Venus called for war, the king of Tikal would lead his troops into battle in an effort to obtain warriors for sacrifice. But these facts were unknown to Stevens, who believed that some future traveler would rediscover this city and would experience sensations which seldom fall to the lot of man. It was April of 1840 when Stevens and his entourage crossed the Mexican border. There was rejoicing all around once on the Mexican side of the river.
We were out of Central America, safe from the dangers of revolution, and stood on the wild borders of Mexico, in good health, with good appetites, and something to eat.
It was still difficult country, a region of spectacular waterfalls fed by treacherous, impassable rivers flowing through deep ravines. And it was the rainy season. The trails had turned to mud, the insects were without pity, and the heat insufferable. They reached Palenque in a state of utter exhaustion. Yet the spectacular ruins revived Stevens. His first view of Palenque inspired a cascade of ornate prose.
Through the openings in the trees, we saw the front of a large building, richly ornamented with stuccoed figures on the pilasters. Curious and elegant. Trees growing close against it, and their branches entering the doors. In style and effect, unique, extraordinary, and mournfully beautiful. Amid all the wreck of empires, nothing ever spoke so forcibly the world's mutations as this immense forest shrouding what was once a great city, thronged with people who were stimulated by the same passions that gave impulse to human action now. And they are all gone, and no traces of them left.
The Maya did leave traces in the form of carved images and hieroglyphic writing. The glyphs here at Palenque indicate that the city's history seemed to have stopped around AD 800. The great era of divine kings ended mysteriously as the inhabitants faded into the countryside. No one really knows why cities like Palenque were left to the encroaching jungle. The wealth of all the great Maya cities was built on successful agriculture. Perhaps several bad crops destroyed the faith of the people in their rulers. This huge pyramid, known as the Temple of Inscriptions, was discovered to hold the tomb of Pakal, one of the great Maya rulers of the Classic period. Palenque was as dangerous as it was beautiful. The Stevens expedition left the city weakened by a host of tropical parasites. They made their way toward Uxmal on the Yucatan Peninsula. Stevens was again astonished at this impressive evidence of a lost civilization. He wrote that Uxmal
was beyond all doubt a large, populous, and highly civilized city. Who built it? Why it was located away from water and any of those natural advantages which have determined the sites of cities whose history is unknown. What led to its abandonment and destruction, no man can tell.
A prolonged stay at Uxmal was impossible because Frederick Catherwood was suffering from a high fever. Following an early evacuation of the site, the party headed for the coast and sailed for New York. Then disaster almost robbed the world of their discoveries. Their ship got caught in calm water for days. The passengers and crew were forced to eat the sharks that circled their floundering craft. Luckily, an American ship happened by, and Stevens and Catherwood returned to New York by May of 1840. Stevens' book, Incidents of Travel in Central America, Chiapas, and Yucatan, was published in 1841. It sold 20,000 copies in 3 months, making it a runaway bestseller by 19th century standards. But Stevens hadn't had enough. He and Catherwood set sail for Merida, capital of the Yucatan. Merida in 1841 was a lively, comfortable city. The travelers were in no hurry to leave. Stephen spent much of his time in Merida researching the history of the region, including the story of the Yucatan's conquest by the builder of this house, the conquistador Montejo, who is depicted here with his feet on the head of two Indian warriors. In fact, the Spanish conquest of Merida was a brutal affair. This site was the location of Tijo, a major Maya town. According to the Spanish accounts, 200 noble Spaniards defeated 70,000 Indians here in 1540. When the Stevens party headed out for Uxmal, they were entering territory that was unmapped at the time. They were greeted on their arrival by a swarm of ravenous mosquitoes. Despite this hardship, Frederick Catherwood immediately began rendering images with the help of his camera lucida. These now famous images didn't come without hardship. Vegetation had to be cleared. Maintaining a sufficient supply of food and water was a constant problem, and Stevens soon came down with a high fever. Yet the two men worked with a passion for accuracy and detail that is confirmed by contemporary photographs. The Temple of the Magician was used for human sacrifices, according to Spanish accounts. Stevens had no trouble imagining the scene.
I cannot imagine a picture more horribly exciting than that of an Indian priest with his white dress and long hair clotted with gore, performing his murderous sacrifices at this lofty height, in full view of the people, throughout the whole extent of the city.
Stevens was enchanted with this complex known as the nunnery.
Passing through the arched gateway, we enter a noble courtyard with 4 great facades looking down upon it, each ornamented from one end to the other with the richest and most intricate carving known in the art of the builders of Uxmal, presenting a scene of strange magnificence, surpassing any that is now to be seen among its ruins.
Strange magnificence certainly describes the bleeding ritual which probably took place here. Participants, including the king, would bleed themselves. The blood was absorbed into a sacred paper, which was burnt, forming a thick smoke. This loss of blood led to mass hallucinations. The smoke magically transformed into vision beings. Gods and ancestors revealed themselves to the mesmerized faithful, reaffirming the power of the king. The deeper into the Yucatan Stevens went, the more respect he seemed to gain for the builders of these cities. Here at Caba, he described this facade as one that
would embellish the architecture of any known era, and amid a mass of barbarism, of rude and uncouth conceptions, it stands as an offering by American builders, worthy of the acceptance of a polished people.
The city of Labna, just to the south, inspired these words.
Since our arrival in the country, we had not met with anything that excited us more strongly, and now we had mingled feelings of pain and pleasure. Of pain, that they had not been discovered before the sentence of irretrievable ruin had gone forth against them. And at the same time, it was a matter of deep congratulation that, before the doom was accomplished, we were permitted to see these decaying, but still proud memorials of a mysterious people.
Clearly, Stevens and Catherwood were finding sights beyond their expectations. But this wild and unknown country had still more secrets to reveal as the group headed toward a massive site known as Chichen Itza. Today, the Maya ruins of Chichen Itza attract tourists by the busload. The beach resorts of Mexico's Caribbean coast are conveniently located a few hours away. In 1842, incredibly, this huge site was virtually unknown outside of the immediate area. Stevens was dumbfounded when he stumbled onto the city, flabbergasted at the size of the buildings and the extent of the ruins. Stevens correctly believed that this building was a place for public games of some sort. He also correctly surmised that the game played here was related to a similar game known to have been played in the Valley of Mexico at the time of the conquest. Stevens thought the game was like our tennis. A closer look at the low-relief carvings on this wall of the ball court might have given Stevens a more realistic picture of what went on here. We now know that the Maya ball game was played for the highest stakes. The ball is depicted as a skull, the symbol of death itself. In this image, the blood from a decapitated corpse is miraculously transformed into serpents, symbolizing rebirth. The severed heads of the sacrificed players were taken here to the infamous skull rack. Reports claim the rotting flesh on these skulls glowed with a green fluorescence in the night. Stevens recognized similarities between the carvings here at Chichen Itza and those found in central Mexico, leading him to conclude that the
people who inhabited Mexico at the time of the conquest belonged to the same great race which furnished the builders of the ruined cities of the Yucatan.
Many of these buildings, depicted with great accuracy by Catherwood, are similar to the buildings at Uxmal, Labna, and Kaaba. Chak, the wind and rain god, dominates the design. These well-preserved carvings of the building known as the nunnery found Stevens at a rare loss for words.
All attempts at description would fail, and much more would an attempt to describe the strange interest of walking along the overgrown platform of this gigantic and desolate building.
Elegance gives way to an imperial sense of scale in the newer part of Chichen Itza. The ball court is the largest in ancient America. The Temple of the Warriors, with its famous Shakmul sculpture, is unlike any other in the Yucatan. These differences in style clearly indicate an outside influence, perhaps a conquest by invaders from another part of the Indian world. It is traditionally believed that the man who invaded Chichen Itza is none other than Quetzalcoatl, the warrior king from the city of Tula in central Mexico. The sculpture and buildings on the main plaza would seem to support this theory. It is almost as if the builders here were working from blueprints of Tula. The similarities are striking. Whatever the truth, Life changed drastically here at Chichen Itza with the coming of a new order. Sacrifice seems to have taken on a new importance, as Stephen sensed when he stood here overlooking this water-filled sinkhole, musing about the fate of victims thrown into the dark well beneath. After exploring Chichen Itza, the Stevens party set out for the rumored ruins of Tulum on the east coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. The expedition, traveling through uncharted lands, eventually found their way to a small fishing village on the north coast and hired a 35-foot canoe. The group finally arrived at Tulum after several brushes with disaster. Stevens found the ruins here disappointing. Still, the group worked diligently to clear away the underbrush for Catherwood's illustrations. The small buildings with their low doorways led Stevens to comment,
Throughout the country at times we had heard the building of these cities ascribed to hunchbacks, and the unusual lowness of all the doorways, with the strangeness and desolation all around, almost gave color to the most fanciful belief.
A survey of the site soon revealed the fact that the city was surrounded by a wall. Stevens described the scene as a place that
no longer keeps watch. The fiat of destruction has gone out against it, and in solitude it rests.
It was this desolation, along with an abundance of mosquitoes, that soon drove the party from the site. After a relatively uneventful trip around the coast, they set sail for New York. When published, Stevens' writings and Catherwood's drawings shocked and amazed a whole generation. Here was evidence of a lost civilization, a highly advanced people whose origins and fate were unknown to the world. The conquest of the Aztec Empire is one of history's remarkable stories. Never have so few conquered so many. But the three main characters on the winning side of this conquest, Cortés, Malintzin, and Alvarado, failed to find the life of ease they expected after winning the riches of the New World. Malintzin, who consistently urged Cortés to deal harshly with the Indians, bore Cortés a son, who eventually died as a knight in service to the Spanish crown. She is a reviled figure in Mexico, a traitor to her people. Alvarado, who started the Aztec revolt with his slaughter of Aztec dancers, eventually conquered Guatemala. He continued his brutal ways until he was killed in an Indian revolt in 1541, when he was smothered by a falling horse. After his victory over Cuauhtémoc, Cortés failed to receive the political appointments he felt he deserved as conqueror of Mexico. He left political life and married into a wealthy Spanish family. But he squandered the money on a reckless military venture. He returned to Seville in Spain, where he died in relative poverty in 1547. Today, no statue of Cortés can be found in Mexico. John Stevens, the 19th century explorer who brought worldwide attention to the lost cities of the Maya, continued to seek new adventures. He became involved in a grand scheme to build a canal between the Caribbean and the Pacific. He died in 1852 after contracting a tropical disease in Panama. Apocalyptic endings were nothing new to the people of ancient America. Before the arrival of Cortés, all of the Olmec sites were destroyed. El Tajín was abandoned. Teotihuacan torched. Tula and the classic Maya cities deserted. The cult of Quetzalcoatl, which began here at Teotihuacan, was the beginning of the end for the high civilizations of ancient America. But this cycle of sacrifice, destruction, and renewal was the foundation of all the Indian civilizations from the Olmecs to the Aztecs. By ritualizing war, the ancient Americans were able to build cities without walls. The arts and sciences prospered. Kings would dispense with rivals by capturing them on the battlefield and then sacrificing them in public rituals. We know this happened because Indian kings would memorialize these acts of conquest and sacrifice on their stone monuments. Sacrifice became a way of preserving civilization, ensuring the continuation of life as measured by the sacred calendar. This civilized war proved to be the Aztecs' undoing. The Spanish were veterans of the pillage and destruction common to European conflicts. They were stunningly ruthless in their quest for the gold of the Aztec Empire. Ironically, just as the Aztec prophets had predicted, their world did end with the coming of the bearded stranger from the Eastern Sea. Though their temple cities are now tourist attractions, many of the Maya still live in the time and space defined by the ancient sacred calendar. It is the Western world, they believe, that is doomed to end in a coming apocalypse. This, after all, is the fate of empires.